afternoon. My name is Joanna Wolf. I'm Vice President for Advancement and University Relations at UHD, and I want to welcome you to today's Gator Grit series. This is the last series in our spring 2021 session, and Gator Grit has become a hallmark series, bringing notable leaders from across the region to the UHD community to share a variety of insights on a wide range of topics. Today's topic is Synergy on the Bayous, a confluence of public art, greenways, and conservation. And we have a wonderful representation of community partners and university leaders. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator. Dr. Akif Usman is Dean of the College of Sciences and Technology and a professor of biology and biochemistry. He served in a variety of positions in UHD's College of Sciences and Technology and was appointed dean in June 2014. Since becoming dean, he's assisted his colleagues in developing UHD's new BS in Geosciences and MS in Data Analytics degrees. He's provided leadership as the college moved into a new state-of-the-art facility and increased its commitment and outreach in the area of sustainability. During his tenure at UHD, he's worked with colleagues to secure grants to support faculty and student research. And most recently, he was instrumental in securing a Howard Hughes Medical Institute grant to help recruit and support underrepresented students in STEM fields. We're happy to have him with us at UHD and as our moderator today. And I'm going to turn it over to him now so he can facilitate introductions to the rest of our panelists. Dr. Usman.
Thank you, Joanne, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And it's a pleasure to be here with some wonderful people from around the Houston community, as well as a special guest from California. And so we have joining us today, artist Jane Kim from Houston community. We have Karen Fisher, Richard Gibbons, and Matt Nielsen, and then two faculty from UHD who have interests in the works that we'll be talking about today, Dr. Lisa Morano, from the Department of Natural Sciences, and Mark Cervenka from Arts and Humanities. At this point, before we get started in a discussion, I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. And so when I call out your first name, please tell us who you are and how you came to this project real briefly, and your role in your organization or the university. So I'll start with our most special guest, who is the artist of the Confluence wall, Ms. Jane Kim. And the famous words for 2021, you're muted.
I did it. I did the thing that we worked so hard to work around. Hello, I'm Jane. I am joining you from California in San Francisco. I have a studio called Ink Dwell, and we explore the wonders of the natural world through public art, scientific illustration, and fine art. And I am part of this group because we just recently, our most recent project was a mural called Confluence at the confluence of Buffalo Bayou and White Oak Bayou, just at the base of University of Houston downtown.
Thank you. Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Farber. My title is Vice President for External Affairs at Buffalo Bayou Partnership. And part of my job is to oversee our public art program, which Buffalo Bayou Partnership is known for. We have a long history of hosting both permanent and temporary public art projects in the city all along Buffalo Bayou. And prior to this position, which I took in May, I was actually at University of Houston Central Campus running the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Center for the Arts for about 15 years. So that's also my background and my connection to UH. And as far as this project goes, we partnered with Houston Parks Board and Houston Audubon and the other partners involved in this, UH Downtown, on this project. And we also have quite a history with the name Confluence, which I'll talk about later.
Great, thank you. Richard.
I'm unmuted. I'm Richard Gibbons. I'm the Director of Conservation for Houston Audubon. In addition to getting some feedback there, let's see if I can fix that. In addition to managing land, acquiring land, we have monitoring projects. We do a lot of consulting with the community and partners. And we have a big network. I hope we talk a little bit more about our networks and building those networks. And that's how I came to this partner, from an old friendship in the bird world. And we were able to connect, and it's been, a great experience.
Great, thank you. Matt.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Matt Nielsen. I am the Chief Operating Officer for the Houston Parks Board. I had the pleasure of teaming up with Jane and our collaborative partners at Buffalo Bayou Partnership and Houston Audubon and UHD to put this very exciting and wonderful project forward. As an urban planner, I'm very new to Houston and to this position. I just started in late October, and it was such a pleasure to start off with a project like this. My background as an urban planner is with arts and culture, and most of my career before Houston was spent in Miami and in Chicago, where I had the pleasure of working on the operation and opening of Millennium Park. So great to be here in Houston, and very excited about our completed mural and all the great things that are coming forward because of this collaboration.
Wonderful, thank you. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Morano. I'm a professor of biology and microbiology in the Department of Natural Sciences. And for many years, I've taught environmental biology, environmental microbiology. And a few years ago, I started the Center for Urban Agriculture and Sustainability. And we have a nice footprint in the bottom of the new LEED Gold certified science building, which is behind me. And I think that's it. I'm very passionate about ecology, environment, and the intersection of the sustainability triangle, right? So environment, social stability, and a sound economic model to move us forward.
Wonderful, thank you. Mark.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this really great group of people. My name is Mark Cervenka. I am a professor of art at UHD in the Arts and Communication Department. I'm also director of the Art Gallery, so have a great deal of time and investment in the arts as they interact with our school and our community. And I've also had a great deal of time and work with the UH system, public art of the University of Houston system that is really largely responsible for creating public artworks for the system throughout the 4 campuses when new construction is in place. So I'm really happy to have this mural at my home base at UHD, and I can visit it very often just walking down the stairs and taking a look at it. So thank you for doing that, Jane, and thanks so much for having me.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. So we're gonna start with some questions and to the panelists. If you, those of you listening in, watching in, if you have a question, please go to the bottom of your screen and you will see on the far right-hand side or near the right-hand side, it says Q&A. Type your questions in there. I will take a look at them periodically as we go through, and as the questions seem particularly relevant to the responses, I will try and ask them right away. Otherwise, I may hold off until we have a little bit more of a natural break. Okay, so why don't we get started? And I think the best place to start is actually with our artist, Ms. Jane Kim. So Jane, I was just down at the mural yesterday, taking some photographs, and it is quite extraordinary. And I think it's it is a marvelous, marvelous piece. So can you tell us a little bit about, with that particular piece, what inspired it, and why you selected the species that you did? And then we'll come back to a larger question to the whole group, talking about why we call it the Confluence Wall. But first, let's start about how you were inspired to do this piece and the species that you chose.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, one of the motivations, when you're creating public artwork, it is often very site specific. And I know for Inkwell, that is absolutely the case. And so it being in Houston, we're celebrating something that makes Houston very special. And one of the things that makes Houston remarkably special beyond its diversity of people are its diversity of birds. And particularly in the spring and in the fall, when we see migratory species come through, we have thousands of birds. And so how to narrow that story down and tell an exciting piece about place and transition, I was very much inspired by showing the plumages of birds in different times of year. So on some species, the change between the spring and the fall is quite drastic and remarkable. So really being able to highlight the two in a mirror image and be able to compare and contrast was really exciting to me. And then of course we couldn't just end it there. We wanted to tell an entire season. So on the ends of each mural, we also included examples of migratory breeders, which means that they come to Houston to breed and make their nests, whereas the 6 that are in the center continue to fly north and move on to northern territories where they breed and lay their eggs and nest. And then on the end, we have some examples of winter species that you'd be able to see, which we ended up being able to see that transition and saw quite a few of the species that were represented in the mural.
Thanks. That's a great description of the mural as one witnesses it. I think the other thing that is also apparent there is it looks like you have a map of the bayou imprinted
Yes.
in that soft gray heading out in both directions. It's also mirror imaged. Is that correct?
Yes, and it kind of ends up looking like a Rorschach or branches or lightning bolts. I mean, it's pretty evocative of whatever, kind of comes to your mind. But yeah, absolutely, being rooted in scientific illustration, incorporating the map of the bayou and finding a sense of place in that map was one of the reasons why we chose that as a backdrop.
Great, thank you. This is kind of a question for everybody, but I may start with one person in particular to answer a particular question, a feature of it. So one of the things about this mural is that it has an unusual title. If you're just looking at birds, you don't think of the word confluence necessarily. And so what I was wondering is if you would all talk a little bit about why you think it's important for this synergy that's being created along the bayou here, in which we see art and nature come together to sort of show the community something. And the title of the piece was Confluence, and I'd wonder if folks would talk about what that means to you as you think about the mural confluence of art and nature and the synergy that arises out of that. One thing, if just to sort of, for those of you who are going to answer later, if you think about the fact that in synergy, it's often that the outcome is greater than the sum of what you see. And so if there's some thinking you have about that, that'd be great. But I'm actually going to start with Richard, because in the preamble, we had a great little discussion about the nature of confluence and how the name got there. So I'm going to let him kick this off, and then we'll have others chime in.
Thank you. Well, I'm a biologist, like some of you, and some of you in the, right. And so I'm always looking for patterns in nature. And people are part of nature. We sometimes forget that, but we exhibit some of those same patterns. And in the bird world, and especially when you're looking at how they move, migration is fascinating. It's held humans' attention for millennia, more than millennia, a lot of millennia, as long as there have been people, I'm sure. But, we connect to get to that pattern, we connect so strongly with birds. I mean, they can fly, yes, but they're based, their two systems that they rely on the most are vision and hearing, like us, which is why people connect so strongly to birds, because we get them. and we were able to detect those patterns in nature more easily. So mobility and the timing, the phenology of how birds are moving through a particular space is also a beautiful pattern. And if you're in a place long enough, it begins to make sense. And so Houston is definitely, we all recognize the pattern of the roads that are all crossing through. And those roads were paths before. And those paths were there because there were rivers there and it was the easiest place to cross. And so the geology informed all of those decisions that were then laid down. Very similar to how those particular pathways, be they evolutionary or whether the distributions of those birds were following the vegetation in an area that was following the geology. So these things are all coming together, this confluence. And Houston in particular, because where it's based on the Gulf Coast, it is getting migratory birds coming up north to take advantage of the long days. And you either go across the Gulf or you go around the Gulf. Either way, you're coming through Houston, and it is a lot of birds. And that's true for humans as well. And then in the fall, much of North America, the migratory birds, they come through the eastern part of North America and they drain right past Houston, or they launch off from the upper Texas coast as well. And so, for me, that confluence of people and biology, and bird biology in particular, is what really, speaks to me. I'll stay away from the art. Love all of that, but I am ill-equipped to speak with an informed voice on it.
I think you have spoken with an eloquently informed voice. So that's a great act to follow, right? So Matt, Karen, Lisa, or Mark, do you want to try and follow up on that? How do you see the synergy of art and nature here as displayed by the Confluence wall as a valuable feature of the urban landscape?
Well, I'll kick off. From the viewpoint of Houston Parks Board, we think of the physicality of the confluence, the actual location, which was a process. There were, I think, over 50 locations examined before settling on this location at the confluence of White Oak and Buffalo Bayou. And beyond the physical confluence or the physicality, it's really a confluence of collaboration. And the collaboration that we've been able to do, not just with our programmatic partners of Buffalo Bayou Partnership, UHD, and Houston Audubon, but also the approval process that organizations like us have to go through in public-private partnerships with Harris County Flood Control and the city of Houston and such. So there's really, the way we can look at it from our lens is that it's a confluence of a lot of collaboration, which makes these things happen and also leads to rich outcomes, because our desire here is also for partnerships that really talk about the natural flyways that are the Biogreenways that are comprise the Houston region.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you. Lisa, Mark, Karen, would you like to add to that?
Oh, I'll just chime in with a quick thing to say also that the two bios meeting at UHD has always been an inspiration for our teaching, right? Like all the knowledge comes together, and then we have this bigger river that can actually make change as it goes towards the sea, right? That we are in the middle of Houston in a way, and that is the place where what we're trying to do here is grow some knowledge and make some change. So I love the term as well, and I'm sure this is going to come up, but I love the combination of the science and art always, because what we talk about in environmental classes or sustainability classes is that we can use facts, we can use science to inform us, but we already know that data doesn't move people, right? Art moves people. So in order to get people to move, they have to feel, they have to care, right? And they have to have some passion and connection. And so I just really love the stuff that Jane does. And we are lucky enough to have her piece here now.
I'm going to jump in after what Lisa said, because I sort of have the converse to say as well about this, being an art person. But as Matt said, Buffalo Bayou Partnership entered into this project through the Houston Parks Board approaching us about it, and our knowledge that not only are we transforming and revitalizing Buffalo Bayou, but also our offices are directly across the bayou from where the mural is located. And so we're just absolutely thrilled to get a chance to see it every single day. We are in fact working from our offices at least part of the time right now. And but also in terms of what Lisa just said, coming from an art perspective, my favorite kind of discussions are when we get to learn from those who are specialists in other disciplines. So artists have the ability to bring different disciplines together and get these dialogues happening when otherwise they wouldn't. But then artists and curators like me, we get to learn from the biologists, the astronomers, the the other science or mathematics or whatever it may be, disciplinary specialists, and that's really gratifying for us. So that confluence is, I think, what is particularly fulfilling to me personally, even though really my initial point of connection with the title was the literal confluence of the bayous.
Well, I'll try to follow all of that and wrap that up a little bit for me. I know it's wonderful for me to see the passion that is here. I mean, I know as being a colleague that Lisa is well known around our campus for being very passionate about sustainability and ecology and those things. And I've loved listening to Richard talk about the birds and how passionate he is about that too. We're all a community of diverse people with different interests, and any vehicle we can have that will help to communicate those ideas that are they're so important to you guys and are so important to all of us that we don't really have access points to. And I think that is the confluence of the art and that science and that understanding of our world. Art is really a vehicle for communicating things that are important to people. And that's clearly important to you all. And I think it helps us better understand our world, better understand our environment. And, in that way, get along a little better too, both with our planet and our fellow people.
Great, thank you, Mark. That kind of leads me into another question with respect to confluences that we have in the panelists here. We have various members of the community as well as the university, and the confluence of the university and the community is a critical piece. The university is really an extension of our world in which exploration through scholarship is uncovered, or creative works are uncovered. And then it's through the community, people like Karen and Matt and Richard, especially as I think about urban planning, my goodness, right? The whole notion of the way we transform in an evolving planet in which resources have to be managed much more carefully and equitably in a way, and then preserve the beauty that we have around us. And I think the mural represents for me that sense of reminding ourselves that there's, when you look a little bit more carefully than just that the bird that's larger than I am when I walk by, these are small animals that if you just are attentive, you see them as you walk around this campus, as you walk around your neighborhood. So thank you for that.
May I add one thing to this confluence conversation? Just to maybe summarize too, I think it's really interesting that you can't have confluence without movement. And one of the things that's so striking to me about Houston is that it is a place of movement. And the port, historically the ports right there at Allen's Landing, that was one of the reasons why Houston was on the map. And this is where Houston was really started, right? And then we've got the train tracks under UHD and, you know, the shipment and the movement of trains and, you know, people coming to Houston as it's one of its most diverse cities in the United States, you know, that sense of movement. And so with that long horizontal wall, you know, you'll notice that all the birds, of course, are represented in flight and in motion, and that, you know, the mirror image of the spring and the fall, you know, that's also to communicate that there is movement and time and shift and change, and that nothing is stagnant. And I think that one of the things that we all are trying to continue to build is positive movement to, you know, better Houston Parks Board, the Biogreenways, UHD, everything is towards moving into the future, which to me is quite a special. And water, you know, my goodness, movement, talk about movement in water. It shapes land.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great summary of that entire discussion. Thank you so much. Building on that, Matt, Richard, or Karen, you know, your respective organizations came together and found Kim, or perhaps Kim found you. You can elaborate on that in a moment, but also talk a little bit about, you know, you come together to do this. How do you work together in a way that you can make this undertaking take place in a reasonable amount of time, so that whatever limitations the project might have, whether it's the seasons or whether it is the way the financing is done. Talk a little bit about that. I'm going to lead you in another direction also, because I think it's valuable for our students to learn how we connect. One of the things about Confluence is connections, right? And building networks and how we connect with people that are normally outside of our daily lives. So with that nice complex question, anyone want to chime in first?
Well, I'll kick off. You know, one interesting sort of background on how the project came about was, and of course, my perspective starts on October 30th, 2020. With this as well, as I came to Houston Parks Board, was you know, there was a bit of an interruption because of the pandemic. You know, site selection had taken place, I believe, in 2019 and into 2020. And there was also, you know, naturally with movement, you know, some folks were no longer with Houston Parks Board and had moved on. So thus, you know, we really had to sort of pick up the pieces to get the project moving again. And with that, there really had to be collaboration. And, you know, I think one of the initial partnerships that Jane had with Inkdwell was really the curatorial aspect with Houston Audubon and really selecting the species. So, you know, there was the site selection, that was a process. There was the sort of curatorial content process, but then also, you know, when things sort of stalled a bit, we really had to circle back and make sure that we had all the other pieces lined up, that being with the governmental entities, because it is public land, public property, public right-of-way, essentially, but also working with Buffalo Bayou Partnership, because they are the stewards of that part of Buffalo Bayou where it does meet White Oak. And so we really had to talk about how we would work together to make all that happen. So the nature of public-private partnerships, because that's really how things get done, essentially around open space and resiliency and all the other sort of aspirations that we have in the Houston region, is to really put all those pieces of the puzzle together and have those conversations. And, you know, we really had to, you know, put things in motion just to get things ready. And then you were really fortunate that we were able to do this in the springtime as well. You know, also, fortunately, the timeline was after the unfortunate events of February with the freeze. So, you know, it's really a lot of prioritizing, you know, dealing with circumstances that come up and interruptions just to put things together.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in after you, Matt. You know, especially particularly for students who are curious or interested in how these sort of things come together, you know, so much of it has to do with relationships. And so, you know, not only my initial relationship to somebody who then connected us to Houston Parks Board, but then Houston Parks Board's relationship to, you know, reach out to Buffalo Bayou Partnership. And then there's a mutual friend that Richard and I share who put us in touch when I asked him, who can I speak to that could give me some expertise around, the birds of Houston. So really a lot of it is kind of a 3 degree of separation, and who you're able to be introduced to as a result of your existing network. And then, beyond that, once we've all sort of agreed to come around this effort, it is a continued amount of time and energy and belief that you have in the work that keeps it afloat and keeps it living. No one let it die. And I think that that's also really an important part of the puzzle, is that we all believed in the merit of bringing this to Houston. So that is kind of how it felt for me. And it's been wonderful to work with so many folks who really did believe in this and do believe in it.
I would just add to,
Go ahead, Karen,
sorry, Richard. Mine's quick. I'll just say that I would just like to add to what Jane said, that the "no one let it die" statement is so resonant with art projects, because often they are challenging to get off the ground. And so I would say to those of you who are, entering into endeavors like this, that you do need to be persistent. In many cases, there are funding challenges or there are logistical challenges to realizing these projects. And then in our case, there is also just the multiple stakeholders and all of the communication that needs to happen. It is challenging, but it takes a visionary, like an artist, like Jane, to really carry the torch for a project. And then also in many cases, an administrator or multiple administrators who will sort of carry that torch with them and support their vision from start to finish. So, from my perspective, that was very much Matt working with the Houston Parks Board, even though you haven't been there for the entire life of this project, but really, connected with us at Buffalo Bayou Partnership and said, hey, will you work with us on this? So, it's all of that determination that makes it feel like it sort of magically came together from the outside perspective, like, oh, this thing just popped up one day. But in fact, there's tremendous time, energy, effort, resources that happens behind the scenes to make these things appear like they magically just came out of thin air, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we've got some students paying attention, and I've been a student a long time, and I've been not a student for, I think, even longer now. But something that is so important, I believe, is the relationships that you're building now and in your early career. The investment is worth more than you can know. The friendships that you build, the organizations that you volunteer with, all of those connections, those places where confluence happens, these social interactions, those are where your solutions are going to be. And whether you're the visionary or whether you're the doer, you're going to build a team if you want something to happen. You may see, someone may share a vision with you, and you're the engineer that has to make the thing actually happen. And if you believe in that vision, you're going to have to talk to the artist or the other person that can help get the funding for it. So I would just say, nurture those relationships and, be kind to everyone, because you never know where that relationship is going to, be fruitful and really help you as a bigger community or a small community, do great things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to take a quick break, think about the question some more. We can come back to it, but there is a comment here. And while I read the comment, it's somewhat lengthy, something that Joanna will appreciate. I want to share my screen with a photo of the Confluence wall that I sent around to some folks, and I forgot that I still had it. So this is from a few weeks ago, Jane. I hope you remember.
Yes, of course.
I think that's when the day we first met, or maybe the second time, because this was with a better camera.
Yeah,
So
the Bayou hasn't been completed in this one yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to read a comment from a student, I think. The comment is, the confluence for me happened last Monday when I was taking UHD stairwell down to the bayou and saw a pigeon on its nets on the huge magnolia tree. It was so close and so delicate. A few minutes later, when I reached the walkway and saw the breathtaking mural that resonated deeply with me. It was so unexpected and an amazing experience. And so the stairwell is, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the stairwell is that big structure off toward the end there, far away end, and that's the structure that I believe she was coming down. But this is, this is an extraordinary picture. There are some more, which I'll take another break and show another one. A couple got emailed to me, and we can see the mural in its formation. There is another question before I go on. I think it might be a good time to do it. I don't want it to get lost. I mean, Jane, I think you actually answered this a little bit already, but as you reflect on this, are there sort of more personal ways in which you think about this? And that is, a student is asking, what is the most challenging aspect of being a science illustrator or an artist that engages science the way that you do?
Oh, that is a great question. I mean, there's a lot of different directions I could go with this, but namely, one of them is how to stay true to science and information and accuracy, while also allowing there to be some interpretation and emotionality that comes through with it, so that it isn't necessarily a dry, a graph or diagram, because information, it is what it is. But for me, it also is what makes something the most stunning it can be. And I often find that when I make corrections scientifically, it somehow even beautifully helps the composition or helps the overall piece feel more right. But as I do straddle being both a visual artist and a scientific illustrator, I sometimes come, at odds with how to visualize that in a way that's both emotional, compelling, but accurate.
It's interesting, but if we have time, maybe at the end we can come back and do a nerd fest on the nature of visualization and interpretation, because as a cell biologist who has to deal with visualization, that is also a particular challenge as well. I'd like to just kind of move on. We can come back to any point that we've covered so far if someone has a comment that just sort of rises above them and want to just jump in. But I'd like to ask Mark, how important do you see public art pieces like the one here that we have on campus communities and also in the greater local community as important to the community, and particularly when they're on campus, to the faculty, staff, and students? What do you see about the public art in this way as its significance to the community?
Well, if I just go back 100 years anyway, the idea of the mural, you can't really talk about that without talking about Diego Rivera and the importance of that in the Mexican muralist movement, and how important it was for those artists to communicate what was going on in their country, really important ideas about indigenous populations and politics and all of those sorts of things. And then in the United States, of course, you've got the WPA and all the programs that came about from that in the 1930s to 1943. I think I read that there were upwards of 4,000 murals created in the U.S. during that time period. And so it's clear that a lot of people from a lot of different areas have viewed the idea of public art as very important, as a way. And I know that in the WPA there were a certain amount of freedom for the artist, but they really, one of the suggestions, maybe I'll put it that way, was that they really go into the local communities and think about what life was like and talk to those individuals in those communities and try to represent something that was a part of that community in the mural that they would place in that community. So there's a huge history there, and it clearly adds a lot of memory and history and continuity to a community to see those things and to be able to express things that aren't easily expressed in other forms. We see that in, our recent area of social justice murals popping up that relates to particular events. And so it is a very important, I think, part that is inclusive of many different factions of our society. Within our little enclave, within the UHD and UH system, I mentioned earlier that the UH public art system is in the UH system. They have been putting a 1% for the arts toward new project building since the mid 60s. And it's one of the oldest programs in the entire country that has done that. And so it is an enormous collection, one of the premier collections of public art in a university system in the country. And at UHD, we've really benefited from that in a very large way. We have lots of art that reflects very many different ways of thinking about our environment and our community. In the Marilyn Davies Business Building, we have the Hashimoto Cloud Deck, which has its own kind of ephemeral and eternal kind of confluence of ideas that work through that as a mobile. But one of the things that I found really interesting in thinking about this question was the John Biggers mural that we have on our campus, which is just almost literally above where Jane's is in the third floor of the academic building. And John Biggers is a towering figure in African-American art, and came to Houston in the late 40s. And the mural called Salt Marsh that he did for UHD was commissioned through that program in 1997, and is really includes the Bayou as part of its iconography, very much so, and birds as well. And so, there are stories about, and it also includes lots of stories about African stories and mythologies that he includes with that. But there's a story about him really loving nature and taking walks on the bayou as ways of gaining inspiration and bringing that into his artwork. So there are lots of opportunities for people in this city. There's lots of public art, there's lots of civic art, but within the UH system, of course, there's lots of art too. People can go on the publicartuhs.org site and find in each of the campuses all of that art, and really be able to see a lot of it around our campus as well. And through the website can find out where that is. But the Biggers mural I found was really a beautiful confluence with Jane's mural in the way that it connected that idea of nature and the bayou specifically with different cultural kinds of things. So I really, really loved that.
Yeah, one of my first days at UHD was in the fall of '97. I don't know that the Biggers mural was up for very long, because I know it kind of went up with the building of the academic building, but I just remember it floored me to look at it. It was visually overpowering the first time you look at it, and you can spend, I think I see something new in it all the time. It's a marvelous piece. And you're right. I think it's a great complement to the outdoor work that Jane has produced for us. There are a couple of related questions to what you've been talking, Mark. So I want to sort of ask them coming from students. One of them is, I'll go to the last one first. one, is this art going, do you know, Mark, if this art is going to be part of the public art system for the UH system? Is this going to be incorporated as part of what the UH system advertises as its public art?
No, I don't believe so. That it was brought about through the agencies of the other people on this webinar, and so that it would be the purview of their agencies, and so I would let them address kind of ownership or that sort of thing.
Sure, I'll jump in and answer that, and I just also want to be sort of share with everybody that for public art, a lot of times it involves the philanthropic community, and we were very fortunate with this particular piece that we had a benefactor who really supports nature and the greening of Houston and Houston's place in the flyways, as we've talked about on the call. Specifically for this piece, it is technically City of Houston property, with Harris County Flood Control being that it is on Buffalo and White Oak Bayous at that confluence. So those permissions, and I did see the question, those permissions had to go with those agencies. And the arrangement is, it is technically on Buffalo Bayou. So Buffalo Bayou Partnership are the stewards of everything and all the activities that pretty much go with any activity or the physicality of Buffalo Bayou. But in this particular section, the Houston Parks Board, like many other sections of the Biogreenways, is maintaining it. So we are able to, one, not only get the permissions and get all the collaboration together to site the mural, able to work with Jane, able to facilitate the donation, but also we are able to maintain it as a piece because it is in a vulnerable section. We're almost viewing it as floodable art, and that we also have all that information from Jane should it, for whatever reason, get compromised by a natural event, that we'll be able to restore it and keep it up. So it's a lot of pieces, again, to put together, a confluence of many different things in collaboration, but that's really kind of to answer that question that was in the Q&A, that those are the pieces that came together to make it happen.
I can also speak to process from a slightly different angle in terms of how things become part of university collections. Because like Mark, I had been involved when I was at University of Houston on the system-wide art acquisition committee for the university. And, the process is long to select works, and they get funded through, as Mark said, a percentage of budgets to build new buildings. So it's a certain process to select those artists. And interestingly, when I was at UH main campus, we had an artist who was coming who wanted to create a large scale, semi-permanent work on a wall of a building. And the artist's name is El Cid, and the work is still on the UH campus. He's a very well-known artist. And we were really excited about the project, but we ended up going through a very different approval process from what we would have if it had been something we were proposing to be acquired into the university's permanent collection. Instead, our process, for what it's worth, this is sort of technical, but we went through several other university committees to say, this is the site this artist would like to use. This will be viewable on the campus. It will be around for many years, but we're not calling it a part of the collection. It's not owned by the University of Houston in quite the same way. So that was a really, really interesting sort of workaround to what is essentially a very, very different process to acquire works that are permanent for the university, but just as embraced as any other manifestation of public art on the UH campus.
Great, thank you. I think it sort of begs one other question that's sort of sitting in the Q&A right now, is that from what you folks know here in this panel, are there other murals being planned for this corner of the bayou? And And so there's also any chance we can get a mural by the bike repair station. I mean, and the reason why I bring this question up, besides the fact that it's here, is that when I was visiting the wall at the first time, I actually met Tom Bacon, and I think he is not shown in here. Hold on a second. Let me find that right photograph.
Yeah, we just saw him.
That was him.
Yep. Okay. Do you see him? Let's see. I want to make sure it's the right one. There's one with a better. There he is. Nope, that's his brother.
Nope, that's his brother. Yeah.
There he is. Okay. And his brother. But anyway, we talked about the fact that, you know, this area of downtown sees a lot of wildlife. We have a biologist who is interested in having a display for the raptors on the north side of where the new science building is. And we had talked about all these surfaces that were available. And so one of the things that interested me is, you know, is looking into that notion of could we do more of this stuff. And I just wanted to ask you right now is, do you know of other work that's being planned in this region?
So it depends on if you're asking about Buffalo Bayou or if you're asking about other areas that are overseen by the Houston Parks Board, but Matt and I could sort of, you know, both talk about this. I will say for Buffalo Bayou, and I think there was another question in the chat about a project that students are doing related to Buffalo Bayou Park, which is also within our area of jurisdiction. We have a curated public art program. So we receive lots and lots of ideas and we think through all of them. And we're very deliberate about what we do. I would say that at this particular site, if something is in the sight lines of this work, I would want it to be in conversation with this existing work so that we don't have this proliferation of projects that sort of aren't complementary to each other. But I mean, so it's not always the more the better, you know, is what I'm saying. And at the same time, if that is possible, if it's possible to realize something that is in conversation with this work, it can be very, very exciting. And yet another, you know, instance of confluence, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and I think that is critically important. I will read one comment from one of our faculty members in the sciences, Dr. Sel Horta, and she was talking about the fact that there is a related project that UHD students are engaged in, and UHD students have been involved in a variety of things along the bayous through work that Dr. Sel Horta has done, as well as Dr. Morano over the years. And right now, these students are studying the history and the flora and the fauna of the Buffalo Bayou, and they're trying to create pieces of video flyers, works that can communicate to the community the richness of this area. I think they're always looking for new collaborators, and this gets back to one of my early questions on people finding each other. And I see one of my roles right now working with advancement here is to get you all connected with Dr. Sel Horta in some way that will be productive. Before I ask another question, I was wondering, you know, since I brought up this comment and your comments, Karen, Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been involved with in the past, as well as how you see the sustainability work that you're doing with your students connect to the bayous right now?
Sure. So I've been teaching at UHD for many years now. And we've always included the bayou in whatever class project we have going on, right? So general biology students drag them outside, general ecology labs, you know, identify the plants. In microbiology lab, we always sample the water, check for nasty bacteria. So it's really easy to, you know, use, the idea is, you know, teach where you live, right? And that has kind of grown into my passion for where UHD is, and the idea of trying to epitomize what it means to have an urban university. So what we are seeing as we move forward on this planet with increasing numbers of people is not this idea that we can save all of our wild areas in pristine condition and have people in a separate spot, right? We really need to get more creative about how humans and the other organisms can live together in a sustainable way. And so really trying to teach that to the students, trying to model that, and trying to model that as a university in an urban environment in the middle of downtown. So I'm super proud of this building behind me, right? It's the first LEED Gold building in the UH system, made out of sustainable materials, thinking about the distance it is up, right? So that it won't flood, but also completely surrounded by native plants, a prairie, all the trees, all the bushes are native. And then there's a water cistern that captures water from the air conditioner condensate, which is used for some student garden beds. And kind of teaching this idea to students that we need to support our ability to grow food in these garden beds, but also combine that with an environment that supports wildlife, right? Native plants along the bayou can be part of a building, and that building can be in the middle of downtown, that we don't have to choose always between structure and urban and wildlife. Like, we really need to think more creatively about how we can combine those, not only for the health of the wildlife, but also our own health, because we know that native plants help absorb water. They increase pollinators for our food, but they also cause us to be calmer and happier, right? And they also improve the value of land, right? So it's a win-win-win. And so really just trying to teach people appreciation, but also how they can become part of the solution to creating a more environmentally sound urban environment.
Great,
I
thank
wanted
you.
to add something to that too, that it was just so wonderful. Thank you, Lisa, for pointing out the aspect of urban and wild being able to coexist in a place, because I can attest to that just from the 6 weeks that I was there working and my team and I were there working. The observations that we were able to have during that time were so special and unique and not typical for what one might think of in an urban setting. So we had ospreys circling, actually catching fish out of the bayou, bringing it up, perching and eating it. We had cliff swallows and bank swallows in the underpass making nests and just continually singing. We at one point even had Chuck Bill's widow, come fly through, like land on the overpass where the train goes, long enough for us to actually each look through our binoculars at this bird, which is really hard to see normally. Usually they're trying so hard to look like a tree stump and they're completely camouflaged. So, I mean, it was awesome to be able to, to your point, the native plant life, the mulberry tree, once it started fruiting, cedar waxwings were just engulfing all of those berries. I mean, so it is absolutely alive at Buffalo Bayou, and especially right there. And we saw alligators in the bayou. I mean, sadly, we did see a dead alligator snapping turtle, and it was, belly up and sort of floating down. But that just, signifies that there is an abundance of life there. So I just think that that is wonderful. And one of the goals of Inkwell's public art is to try to lift those blinders that we often have just walking around an urban place or just in our environment, that we should even be on the lookout for wildlife. And hopefully that when we make all of these species hard to ignore through the act of monumentalizing them in a public artwork, then when they're out and about, they might be more prone to seeing, these animals in their daily lives.
Oh, absolutely. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to sort of move away from the discussion, but on a related discussion, I'd like to focus on the work that Matt, Richard, and Karen are doing. And so I'm going to start with Matt. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the Bayou Greenways, and what do you see as what's coming up next that might be of interest to the UHD community from the Houston Parks Board?
Sure. So Biogreenways is a system of greenways, flyways, trails that about 150 miles planned and proposed, maybe a little more when the project finishes, that came about because of a bond issue back in 2012, where the voters of Houston voted for a $100 million bond through the city of Houston. And that also engaged the Houston Parks Board and the philanthropic community to raise $120 million to see this plan sort of enacted over a period of 8+ years. While all the money has luckily been raised, already we still have some miles to complete, but it is really about a network of embracing the bayous that sort of form a horizontal map of Houston, to utilize them for nature and conservation, but also for people mobility, for people to get around, for people to exercise. And also, it presents arts and culture opportunities like you see with what we've been able to do with Confluence, but also a lot of the work that Karen's been able to do. And then it also augments the work that Houston Audubon. So you really have this sort of interesting system of sort of a horizontal map of Houston, of all the sort of set in place physical bayous. Well, what we're working on now is a plan called Beyond the Bayous, and it really, under the lens of equity and access and resiliency and sustainability, makes all those connections, because there really is a goal about putting a bayou greenway within 1.5 miles of 1.5 million Houstonians. What Beyond the Bayous will do is enhance that connectivity, that access, with utilizing center point easements or other opportunities that there are to connect with green and resiliency throughout the Houston region, and then adding all those aspects of conservancy or conservation that are really important for a built environment, really speaking to what we were just talking about, that, in the middle of this dynamic built environment, you have all these interventions and all these opportunities for nature, and that we can spread that out throughout the massive Houston region through a very interconnected system of natural greenways and systems that support human interaction.
Great, thank you. Matt mentioned both the Houston Audubon Society and the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, but I'll go to Karen first. Karen, can you tell us, the Buffalo Bayou is right outside our door on the south side. So can you tell the folks here in the UHD community who are listening in how we can get involved in the work of the Buffalo Bayou Partnership? And can you share some activities that are coming up that would be useful for the UHD community to know about?
Sure. So just to sort of explain what the organization does overall as context, we are revitalizing and transforming the stretch of Buffalo Bayou from Shepherd Drive all the way to the Port of Houston turning basin. So UHD and our offices, which are across the street from you or across the bayou from you, are in what we consider the downtown sector. But what's about to happen, so many of you know Buffalo Bayou Park to our west. What's about to happen is that over the next couple of decades, east of downtown is going to be transforming substantially. And the east sector of Buffalo Bayou, leading from downtown to the port, is very different in character, as many of us know, from the west sector. Not only because it is more industrial, but also because it's a more residential part of the bayou. So there are neighborhoods, Fifth Ward, East End, Magnolia Park, that are adjacent to the bayou. And also where Buffalo Bayou Park is located, that was city property as it was. There was something considered Buffalo Bayou Park before the transformation that reopened the park in 2015 to be the park that we know now. So in the east sector, the properties are not owned by the city largely. It's a patchwork of sites. And so this is a very, very different project, but that's why it's going to take a couple of decades to realize. But Buffalo Bayou Partnership does own some property, a substantial amount of the property along the waterfront in the East End in Fifth Ward. So we're very, very excited about that. To answer your question about how to get involved, there are so many different ways. So we have volunteer opportunities that are on our website that everybody is invited to participate in. And those are really picking up again Now we had about a year that we had very, very small groups that were able to participate. But in addition, the reason that we do public art, and this sort of goes back to this conversation, is to engage people with the park and open spaces in very different ways. So our public art, our programming, are ways to experience our shared public spaces, even for people who wouldn't necessarily be attracted to parks and green spaces. As much as we might believe, for those of us who are indoctrinated into, the parks and green space and nature conversation, there are a lot of people who have been raised in the urban environment who really don't connect with parks and green space. But we hope that through public art and programming, we can enhance the opportunities for people to engage with our spaces, and also, provide these accidental encounters with things that resonate for people of all walks of life, all Houstonians. So this is the tool that public art can be. It's different from, art in a gallery where you actually have to enter through a doorway and go and deliberately see something. This is the opportunity that public art presents. So as you can see, I'm very passionate about the opportunities for public art along the Bayou, but I also wanted to kind of talk about, why do we do this, and why do we put so much time and energy and money into making sure that these projects happen? And that's really why it leads back to our organization's mission, which is ultimately about the Bayou and the people around it.
Great, thank you. There's a follow-up question that came in while you were talking there. Are you aware of any updates to the damaged trail around the spaghetti warehouse across from UHD? Do you know, is there a timeline for that, or any knowledge about that?
Well, just adjacent to the spaghetti warehouse, I mean, there's construction happening right there for on a private site. But if what this question is referring to is slightly east of there will be a trail connection, and the Houston Parks Board is a part of this project as well, that cuts through what's known as the Wilson building. So there's a trail connection that's under construction now as well, that will provide better connectivity between downtown and points east. I'm not sure if that's the same section that the question is referring to.
I think it's the section I'm thinking of. I'm not sure that it is, but it's the section I'm thinking of. When I saw the question, I thought, oh yeah, that little stretch.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Richard. So your work with the Houston Audubon Society has certainly had an impact because of the Confluence Wall. How other ways do you sort of see the society interfacing with downtown Houston in a way that might be useful for the UHD community to know about, and also in a way that the UHD community can help work with the Audubon Society to enhance the visibility of nature around the campus?
Help me get back to that second question, and I'll start with the first.
Okay.
So I think it's best to think about what is Houston Audubon all about? We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are a bird conservation organization and other wildlife. Our belief is that if we have a community where birds can thrive, people are also going to do better in that environment. Nature is the perfect signal for whether or not we have a healthy environment, whether it's the water and the microbes that are there, or the plants and the insects that are eating them, and that finally make their way up to these giant predators that are these migratory songbirds, if we think about the complete scale of living things. But what we try to do, we know, and that's why this project is such a perfect example. We know that bird conservation is a human endeavor, and it is a cultural endeavor. And the only way that we're going to be successful is if people care about it, and people will not care about it if they don't know about it. And so, we talk about the 3 A's. We want people to, first, they have to be aware. If they don't know about something, they're not going to care about it. And then once they know about it, they see this art. What's that? Is that some made up crazy bird on that wall? No, that's a real Blackburnian warbler. And it comes through right here. That's not from a cartoon. And then so they begin to appreciate it. And then if they appreciate it, say, well, I want to see that. And it's like, well, if you want to see that, you need to stop planting all these exotic invasive plants. And you need to let that hackberry tree that, that you were raised to think was a trash tree and let it grow and plant some more because they're fantastic for wildlife. And so the way that Houston Audubon, views this, of course, we have a sanctuary system. We have 17 sanctuaries out in our greater mini county service area. And, those are places that we can reserve as intact, great systems. And then we've got some properties that need some work. They need some restoration. And we are passionate about taking pieces of property that need help to get their full service of ecological services. We have a natives nursery where we grow out native plant material that's not available in nurseries, and we're finishing construction of a new nursery down on the coast for restoration projects, and those are ways that we try to find where can we get people from appreciation to action, and the action is, okay, we have this visionary who wants, these mini visionaries that saw this Biogreenways project. Well, what's missing? How can we help? How can we help them make this place better for birds and people? And well, we need to grow out native plants, or we need to help 10 other people grow out, to create natives nurseries. But more importantly, if there's no demand for those native plants, then they're not going to be successful. So we have to work with marketers. We have to work with anyone and everyone in our community. They intersect with the endeavor of having a community that is in tune with nature. And we have veered a long way from being in tune with nature. And so we are clawing our way back, but that's one person at a time. That's one decision at a time. And this is one particular piece of work that I think is going to be a spark. I know it's going to be it's already been, spark heavy for a lot of people, but boy, it's going to get a lot of life. So I'm going to get to your second part of that question, and I'm going long. But how can people help? Certainly through our organization, we have lots of ways to plug in. We even have bird surveys. I think they're not all of our monthly bird surveys. There's maybe 12, 13, 14 around the greater Houston area, where we try to just get people to go out and watch birds and, be happy. Recent study, birds make you as happy as money. There. We want people to be able to appreciate our nature, and we want to help organizations, whether that's downtown or the Parks Board or any other organization. If we've got commonality of purpose, then and if we've got the capacity to do it, that's the problem. Sometimes, then we want to find a way to be collaborative. So I think that was maybe part of the second question.
That was entirely the second question. So I'm just looking in, some more stuff is coming in. Let's take a look at one question here to Richard. I want to convert my yard to a native landscape to support native species. Are there resources that you would recommend to help an ignorant homeowner? And that person is not alone. Let me tell you.
I can speak from personal experience as an ignorant homeowner. Yes. Having had a square of St. Augustine, that our family moved into, and, it's one plant at a time. And if you can plug into, groups, there's probably someone in your neighborhood. I bet if you even, whether on a Nextdoor or some kind of Facebook neighborhood page, I know there's somebody in your neighborhood that has that. Or at a community of faith. They've even got more people that are getting closer to nature and growing out things in every sector of people getting together that I can imagine. But Native Plant Society of Texas is a good way to go and get some good information. If you go to Houston Audubon's bird friendly community page, we have spent a lot of effort to have a step-by-step way to do that. And so if you just in any search browser, if you were to look up Houston bird friendly communities, you'll find all of that. It can tell you, whether you want shady plants or sun plants, or you're looking for a screening plant. I'm a huge fan of wax myrtle during that big freeze. So in my square of St. Augustine, so I created a bed in the back, and I put a wax myrtle in one corner, a wax myrtle in the other. And during that freeze, tree swallows are usually it's a wintering bird here. And they're normally, you see them up high eating insects and things. But if you think about it, well, this is a bird, this is a swallow you think of as an insectivore, but it's here in the wintertime. There are times in even the southern tier of states where the insects, it's just too cold for them. Well, they descended on every wax myrtle I could find in our neighborhood on our walks, eating the fruit of those, of those shrubs. And so, cedar waxwings, myrtle warblers, the yellow-rumped warbler, all this wildlife is coming into these plants. And so you can go from a food desert in your backyard and turn it into a veritable buffet if you start planting. And so, every season, whether fall or spring, I try to add some new things. So I had a great look at an ugly brick wall of my neighbor. I mean, it was a nice brick, but I wanted some coral honeysuckle instead. So, I built this wall of coral honeysuckle. And now, when all the bottle brush that's not native to this area was frozen and dead, I mean, the whole area's bottle brush is gone. And so, and we're all waiting, is it going to come back? No, it's not. Maybe some, if it were really small and covered, but that coral honeysuckle popped back. It's a native. And, the hummingbirds were all over it, crossvine, another vine. So there are so many good, hardy, Texas tough plants that will survive much more than the things that are sold at most of the nurseries. And, why do they sell the things that they sell at the nursery? They're easy to grow and bugs don't eat them. We don't want that. We want things that bugs do eat. And so that they will be part of a bigger, well-connected system. I mean, you should look at a Yopon holly and its chewed leaves and say, yes, my plants are edible. And that's a good thing. So, and all of that great flower. And when you start knowing when all of your different seasons come, your red bud, it's flowering. Here come my lyre leaf sage, my brown-eyed Susans are coming next. All these different flowers are, that you've got some different grasses that are coming out in the fall. It's the kind of connectivity that can center you to a place. And I think it's extremely satisfying. And I encourage you to just start. Don't think you have to do it perfect. Pick a little patch. I started with one little patch. I killed the grass, and then I started planting some Gulf muley and two other things. And I went down and spent $20 at the Natives Nursery, and I was off and running. It was very satisfying. Do it.
Great, thank you. We're getting near the end, and what I want to do is circle back to Jane, our special guest for today's talk. And there's a question that I think you answered already, but several people came and joined us late. And so they probably have missed this answer, but I also want to use it as a stepping off point for another question. So the question is, how did you arrive at the particular birds that you painted? And then once you've answered that, I want to then take you in a different direction. Tell us a little bit about when I went to look you up and Googled you back when I first heard about you many weeks ago from our folks in advancement, Alyssa Olson in particular. You have other publications of works that you've done involving birds and words. Could you talk a little bit about that work? What is special to you about that, and where you see yourself going next?
Absolutely. I'm going to actually answer that question first and then circle back to your first question. Yeah, the Wall of Birds is actually a pretty important and special project as it pertains to this particular piece as well. The donor that supported this project and connected with Houston Parks Board in the first place is also a supporter of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So that project, it's called the Wall of Birds. It's in the Visitor Center of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. And that particular indoor mural showcases in 2015 the 243 families of birds that were described, as well as a handful of species related to the evolution of birds. And all of the birds were painted to scale on a world map. So you can already see in that one description that there are a lot of similarities and tie-overs to how I approach the mural here in Houston. And this particular mural is the first public bird art mural that I have done since that particular project. And so, you know, we had already landed on wanting to highlight birds for this particular public art piece. And, you know, in thinking about that complete story of how, I mean, there's so many ways that this mural could have gone, and it was hard to just pick one thing or one topic, but I think that the one that resonated most was to try to tell the full seasonal story of birds. And migration is such an important part of Houston's fabric as it pertains to birds. And so, you know, how do you tell that story? And for me, one of the sort of secrets about birds, and if you observe birds long enough, or if you want to learn more about the whole life of birds, you know, you'll start to realize that the United States is kind of defined by bird migration, which means that we see birds at particular times of the year, which means that we might only be seeing their feathers in a particular time of year. And so really what I wanted to show first and foremost was that male birds, especially depending on whether they're breeding or not breeding, can appear very differently. And so a mutual friend connected me to Richard Gibbons of Houston Audubon, and I just sort of outlined what I was most interested in showcasing in this mural. And I said, can you help me pick out, you know, some key species that would really tell the story beautifully and boldly? And he gave me, I mean, Richard, I think you will agree that it was hard to probably narrow it down to just 6 species, but you know, we landed on these 6 species because they had some of the most dramatic changes between fall and spring. And then, of course, you know, which 3 species do we include to represent migratory breeders? Because there are more certainly than just these 3. I will note that the yellow-crowned night heron is the city of Houston's official bird, so we couldn't not include that particular bird. And then on the right-hand side are winter species, and I couldn't be happier that we included the cedar waxwing there after having spent time there, because it was absolutely populated by cedar waxwings in that period between, you know, late March, early April until the end of April. So it was just quite a joy to hear them and see them.
Great. So I want to give Dr. Morano and Mark a chance to ask a question they may have of you. They're meeting all of you actually for the first time. And I want to make sure that I'm sure they've been incubating some questions and thoughts that they might want to share as we close this event today.
Well, I don't really have a specific question, but it's, you know, it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I know that we're, you know, we have we have a collaboration with Texas Master Naturalists, and some of our faculty have relationships with Audubon or the parks, but we just need to continue to grow that partnership as we move forward, so we can try to make UH downtown, you know, the urban mecca of ecology, urban ecology that I envision.
I would love that, Lisa. That's great. Yeah, and I guess I want to kind of thank Jane for being the hub of this conversation. You know, we often talk about the benefits of interdisciplinary works and how we understand our work better through the eyes of other people and seeing the same thing through different viewpoints. And I think what you're doing, Jane, by connecting the arts, by connecting the sciences, is helping to broaden all of our visions and to really help us see the world in a broader place. So, and I love this conversation. I love being on we've been on so many Zoom calls this last year with so many people. I'm teaching on Zoom and all of this. And so it can be very, the blinders can start to close in a little bit, but this has been just fabulous. And I really, it encourages me to continue to think more about how we can include partners around the city, partners around the different parts of the university and different disciplines to, give those birds a better place and us too. So thank you, Jane. Really, really, really nice.
Yeah, you're so welcome. One of my favorite things to see was biology class coming through on one of their walks and stopping at the mural and being able to talk about migration and visualizing these species too. So, we've always seen our work as a springboard for everything else to follow after. And the mural is just one component of it. And it's wonderful to see how each one of these organizations can then use this as a jumping off point to create more programming and connectivity.
Well, thank you. I want to close by a couple of comments. One to Jane in particular is that I have been reading a book called The People's History of Science. It's very dry, I have to tell you, but it's also very interesting. And one of the things that comes out of it is the sense that science is born out of description of what we see in the world and how we experience it. And as an illustrative artist like yourself, you are at the ground floor of science. Without the kind of work you do, we don't have science. Modern science is built on building sort of connections and ideas about how the world works, but without the fundamental observations that people like you bring to it, couldn't possibly do that kind of work. And so you are, and it's such an integral part of the enterprise. And I'm grateful to see such talent displayed on the bottom, as the students have noted here as well. And so thank you so very much.
Thank you.
For Karen, Matt, and Richard, one thing I don't know how familiar you are with UHD, but I got here in '97 around the time of the building of the new academic wing of the one main building. And one of the things that I really valued about this school is I felt like I walked into a small liberal arts college at public school prices, in which you get to know faculty across the university very quickly. All of the sciences, all of STEM was on 2 floors. I couldn't walk down the hall without bumping into 3 or 4 disciplines. And then business and English and social sciences were 1 floor up or 1 floor down. And the importance of that that I want to relate to you is that the interdisciplinary thinking and the idea that we want to talk to each other about how to further university life scholastically, community engagement, teaching and learning with each other is working with folks like you, and that sense of collaboration you have brought. We certainly look forward to engaging with you folks more and more deeply in the coming future. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for a great discussion, and hope to see you all around soon in one form or another. And we have Jane's mural to always remind us of this conversation and each other. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.